The Galactic Academy of Interstellar Sciences was home to over 4,000 students from 63 different species. It floated in the neutral zone between the Keth Nebula and the Orion Arm, a gleaming silver station the size of a small moon, built to foster unity, knowledge, and cooperation across the stars. Nobody had told Dylan that last part. Dylan was a Vorkai, 7 feet of dense muscle wrapped in reinforced chitin plating, with 4 arms, each ending in crushing claws that could shatter durasteel. His species had conquered 14 systems through sheer physical dominance before even discovering faster-than-light travel. At the Academy, he was the undisputed apex, the strongest student in 2 decades, the kind of creature that made security drones recalibrate their threat assessment protocols just by walking past. He had never lost a fight. He had never even been challenged. Until Lena Marsh arrived. Lena transferred in on a Tuesday, a human girl, which already made the other students whisper. Humans had only been part of the galactic community for 30 years. They were small, soft, warm-blooded in a way that seemed almost comically fragile. No natural armor, no venom glands, no echolocation, no pheromone defense, no electroreceptors. When the intake scanner processed Lena, it flagged her as baseline biological, minimal threat profile. She stood 168 centimeters tall. She had dark hair pulled into a practical braid, sharp brown eyes that cataloged everything around her in quick, efficient sweeps, and the kind of relaxed posture that came not from laziness, but from someone who had absolutely nothing to prove. She found her assigned seat in advanced xenophysics, dropped her bag, and started reading 3 minutes before the professor arrived. Dylan noticed her the way a storm notices a leaf, barely, and only to decide whether it was worth the effort of destruction. He decided it was. It started in the commissary, 3 days after Lena's arrival. Dylan and his crew, 2 Vorkai cousins named Grath and Tull, and a thick-skulled Mindari called Bach, had established territory at the center tables. This was known. This was respected. Every student at the academy understood that the center tables belonged to Dylan's group, and that sitting there uninvited meant consequences. Lena sat at the center table because it had an outlet for her data tablet charger, and she needed to finish her xenophysics homework. When Dylan arrived with his tray and found a human girl calmly eating synthetic grain cakes and scrolling through molecular diagrams in his seat, he stopped. His 4 arms spread slightly, an unconscious display of threat, a posture evolution had spent millions of years perfecting. Every student in the commissary went quiet. Several began quietly moving toward the exits. "You're in my spot," Dylan said. Lena looked up. She looked at Dylan. She looked at the other 3 behind him. She looked back at her tablet. "There's space at the next table," she said, and turned back to her homework. The silence in the commissary became geologic. Even the food dispensers seemed to hold their breath. Dylan's chitin plates rattled, the Vorkai equivalent of cracking knuckles. "Stand up," he said. "Or I'll make you stand up." Lena closed her tablet slowly. She set it aside. She looked at Dylan again with those calm brown eyes, and something in her expression shifted, not to fear, not to anger, but to something quieter and more dangerous. The look of someone doing a calculation. "I'm asking you not to do this," she said simply. "Walk away." Graf laughed. Tull laughed. Even Bach made the wet, gurgling sound that passed for laughter in Mindari culture. Dylan reached out with his upper right arm, the dominant one, capable of bench-pressing a small vehicle, and grabbed Lena's collar. What happened next was later described by 17 different witnesses, cross-referenced, and submitted as an incident report to the Academy's security office. The report was 6 pages long. The actual event took approximately 4 seconds. Lena's left hand snapped up and trapped Dylan's wrist. Not grabbing it, trapping it, with a precision that slotted his joint into a specific angle. Her body dropped and rotated simultaneously, her weight shifting onto her left foot in a movement that seemed almost casual, like she was simply adjusting her seat. Dylan's upper right arm bent in a direction that Vorkai arms did not bend. He made a sound that no one in the commissary had ever heard him make before. Then Lena stood up, and Dylan went down, all 7 feet and 400 pounds of him, crashing into the table with enough force to scatter trays and cups across the floor. Before he could process what had happened, before his other 3 arms could coordinate a response, Lena's knee was at the back of his neck joint. The one vulnerable articulation point in Vorkai chitin anatomy, the gap between the skull plate and the shoulder ridge, and her hand had his dominant arm locked in an angle that communicated, without words, that she could remove it from the socket if she applied another 3 pounds of pressure. She did not apply those 3 pounds of pressure. "I asked you to walk away," Lena said, quietly, conversationally, like she was commenting on the weather. "You had the option." Dylan, who had never felt the floor before, who had never heard his own joints scream, who had never in his entire life been controlled, said nothing. He was too busy understanding something that his brain was struggling to process. He could not move. A creature a quarter of his size had him pinned with what felt like absolute, geometric certainty. Every micro-adjustment he attempted was met with a counter-pressure that told him, calmly and mechanically, that there was no direction out. Graf and Tull took one step forward. Lena looked at them without releasing Dylan. "Don't," she said. They stopped. "What are you?" Graf demanded. His chitin was up, defensive instinct overriding bravado. "Humans don't. You're not supposed to. We've had 200,000 years to figure out how to hurt things bigger than us," Lena said. "We spent most of those years being the smallest thing in every ecosystem we lived in. We have 37 distinct martial traditions specifically developed for size differential combat. I hold certifications in 4 of them." She paused. "Also, I really just wanted to finish my homework." She released Dylan and stepped back. Dylan got up slowly, for the first time in his life, slowly and carefully. He stood at full height and looked at Lena, and the expression on his armored face was something that had never been there before. Something complicated. "Your joint is fine," Lena said. "I didn't tear anything. Might be sore for a day." She picked up her tablet from where it had fallen, checked it for damage, and sat back down. "You can have the table. I'll find another outlet." She picked up her grain cakes. She went back to her molecular diagrams. The story spread through the academy at the speed of disbelief. By dinner, every species on the station was talking about it. Keth diplomacy students replayed the security footage 17 times, arguing over the biomechanical specifics. A Mindari professor of xenobiology requested a formal interview with Lena for research purposes. The Academy's head of security quietly added a notation to Lena's file, a notation that said, in diplomatic security language, "Do not escalate." Dylan did not speak of it, but he did not sit at the center table again either. And when he passed Lena in the corridor the following week, he moved to give her space. Not the disdainful wide berth he gave to creatures he considered beneath his notice, but the careful, considered space that one predator gives to another when it has correctly reassessed the threat landscape. Lena nodded at him. He nodded back. 3 months later, Dylan was assigned to Lena's xenophysics study group. He showed up to the first session with his notes organized, his attitude recalibrated, and a question about molecular resonance frequencies that was genuinely thoughtful. Lena answered it without making a thing of it. They became, in the careful and pragmatic way of 2 people who had established honest terms with each other, something like allies. On the last day of the semester, while the study group was packing up, Dylan said, quietly, so the others wouldn't hear, "You could have hurt me. That day in the commissary. You chose not to." Lena shrugged. "Hurting you wasn't the point." "Then what was?" She thought about it for a moment. "Finishing my homework," she said. And she left. Dylan sat in the empty study room for a long time, thinking about a species that had climbed to the stars carrying 200,000 years of scrappy, brilliant, adaptable survival instinct, and had arrived, small, soft, warm-blooded, apparently harmless, and promptly declined to be impressed by anyone who hadn't earned it. He thought they were going to be interesting neighbors. He thought the galaxy had no idea what it had let through the door.